The Zorvath Dominion had conquered over 100 worlds. Some fell in days, others in hours. No species had ever stopped them. No resistance had ever lasted. Their empires spread across the stars, built on the backs of those they had crushed. When their warships arrived in Earth's orbit, they saw nothing special. A primitive world, divided nations, outdated technology, a people unprepared for war on a galactic scale. It would be easy. The assault began with devastating precision. Orbital strikes reduced military installations to ash before most nations even realized they were under attack. Fighter jets were swatted from the sky like insects. Cities burned, their once proud skylines collapsing into rubble. The world's most powerful weapons, nuclear warheads, hypersonic missiles, railgun prototypes, were rendered useless against energy shields that had shrugged off planetary bombardments before. Within days, the world was in chaos. Governments collapsed as leaders were executed or forced into hiding. Broadcasts from major cities were replaced with a single message: surrender and live. Resist and die. The Zorvath had seen it happen countless times before. They watched as pockets of human resistance tried to fight back. Small, disorganized, futile. Soldiers, police forces, and civilians alike grabbed whatever weapons they had, but it was hopeless. Humanity had courage. But courage meant nothing to an empire that had perfected the art of war. The occupation began swiftly. The Zorvath divided Earth into controlled sectors, each overseen by a governor and enforced by soldiers clad in black armor. Humanity's population, billions strong, was no longer seen as people. They were resources, labor for the empire. Factories were repurposed overnight, their workers forced into endless shifts under the watchful eyes of armed patrols. Entire cities were transformed into processing centers, where men, women, and even children were tagged, classified, and shipped off-world. Some would serve in mines, extracting rare minerals under brutal conditions. Others would work in the shipyards of distant star systems, constructing the very warships that had enslaved them. The Zorvath expected submission. Some species had resisted in the past, but only briefly. Hunger, exhaustion, and cruelty always broke them in the end. But something was different about Earth. The Zorvath noticed it almost immediately. Their soldiers reported incidents that didn't fit the pattern. Enslaved workers weren't just following orders. They were watching. They were studying guard patrols, memorizing supply routes, whispering to each other in hushed voices when they thought no one was listening. A Zorvath officer filed a report about a human engineer who had been caught fixing a broken energy drill without any training, using nothing but scrap materials and guesswork. Another mentioned prisoners refusing to fight each other in the gladiator pits, instead devising ways to overwhelm their captors. One Zorvath general scoffed at these reports. "Let them struggle," he said. "They'll break, just like all the others." He was wrong. This was only the beginning. The Zorvath had conquered many species before. They had seen defiance. They had seen rebellion. But they had never seen humans. At first, everything seemed normal. Forced labor camps ran on schedule. Factories produced weapons, starships, and supplies for the Empire. The mines extracted metals at record rates. It appeared as though humanity had accepted its fate. But beneath the surface, something was wrong. Guards began reporting minor issues, small, insignificant at first. Machines malfunctioned at an unusual rate. Equipment went missing. Supply counts never quite matched. Surveillance systems inexplicably shut down. The Zorvath assumed it was incompetence. Then came the accidents. A fuel depot exploded on the colony world of Varzun, killing dozens of Zorvath officers. An investigation blamed human error, until they discovered the fuel lines had been sabotage. On the mining planet of Sifos 9, a group of human workers overpowered their guards, stole their weapons, and vanished into the tunnels. Search teams were sent in. They never came back. At a shipyard on the Zorvath homeworld, an enslaved human technician disassembled a high-tech control panel and rebuilt it into a working signal jammer, with nothing but scrap. The device was confiscated, the human executed, but the damage was done. The Zorveth had never seen a slave population adapt this fast. The reports kept coming. Zorveth patrols were ambushed in alleyways. Entire cargo shipments disappeared. Messages scrawled in human languages began appearing on walls. Not broken, not beaten. Governors grew concerned. This wasn't just rebellion. This was organized. But they still dismissed it. A few scattered uprisings wouldn't change anything. They were wrong. The turning point came when a group of human workers hijacked a Zorveth transport ship. The plan was audacious, borderline suicidal. Using stolen security codes, they boarded the vessel, overwhelmed the crew, and rerouted the ship to an abandoned asteroid station. The Empire sent a fleet to intercept, but by the time they arrived, the humans were gone, and so was the ship. They had stripped it for parts, taken its weapons, and disappeared. This was impossible. No species had ever done this. No species had ever learned this fast. The Zorveth High Command finally took notice. They issued new orders, tighten control, increase punishments, end this resistance before it spreads. But they had already lost control. The humans had learned something from their captors. They had studied their tactics, memorized their weaknesses, adapted. The Zorveth thought they were enslaving a species of laborers. Instead, they had given billions of humans a common enemy. And humanity was just getting started. The Zorveth still believed they could contain the unrest. They had crushed rebellions before. They had broken species far stronger than humanity. This was no different. To ensure compliance, the governors enacted brutal new measures. Any sign of disobedience was met with swift, public executions. Cities were locked down. Entire sectors were placed under constant surveillance. Curfews were enforced with lethal force. The Zorveth believed that fear would break humanity. They had no idea they were fueling something far worse. The crackdowns did not stop the resistance. They made it stronger. Across the Empire, enslaved humans adapted. They learned how Zorveth weapons worked, how to disable them, how to turn them against their masters. They figured out how to move unseen, how to communicate without being detected, how to fight like ghosts in the night. It started with small attacks. A patrol in a factory sector went missing. Their bodies were later found, each one stripped of weapons, their armor repainted in scavenged human colors. On a mining colony, an entire supply depot exploded. A malfunction, according to official reports. But survivors spoke of human workers slipping away just before the blast. Then came the disappearances. Zorveth officers, taskmasters, and informants began vanishing. One by one, those who enforced the Empire's rule simply stopped reporting in. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just silence. The Empire tried to respond. More patrols, more raids, more executions, but for every rebel caught, 2 more took their place. The turning point came when a human engineer named Daniel Rains led a daring raid on a Zorveth weapons facility. His team, a mix of former soldiers and civilians, infiltrated the factory using stolen uniforms. They hacked security systems, disabled alarms, and walked through the facility as if they belonged there. Then, at the perfect moment, they struck. Guards were overwhelmed in seconds. Automated defense turrets were turned against their own operators. Within minutes, the humans controlled the entire facility. Instead of destroying it, they used it. When the next Zorveth supply transport arrived, they hijacked it, loading it with stolen weapons and volunteers. By the time the Empire realized what had happened, the humans were already gone, flying deeper into space, leaving the crippled production center behind. This wasn't just resistance anymore. This was war. For the first time, the Zorveth High Command panicked. They had never seen a species fight like this. Most enslaved worlds barely lasted weeks before their spirits broke. Humanity had been enslaved for months, and it was only getting stronger. The Zorveth doubled their efforts. More ships, more troops. Entire fleets were redirected to stop the growing insurrection. But it was too late. Because now, humanity had a plan, and the Empire had no idea what was coming. The Zorveth had fought rebellions before. They had crushed armies, wiped out entire civilizations, and turned countless species into obedient servants. But this was different. No matter how many troops they deployed, no matter how many executions they carried out, the resistance did not die, it grew. And worse, the humans were learning. At first, their attacks were simple: ambushes, sabotage, and assassinations. But then, the Zorvath started noticing something terrifying. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were adapting. Captured Zorvath weapons, once thought too advanced for primitive hands, were being modified and improved. Energy rifles with biometric locks were hacked and rewired to work for human soldiers. Shield generators, meant to protect Zorvath outposts, were reprogrammed to block incoming reinforcements. The Zorvath's own tactics were turned against them. Their soldiers relied on heavily fortified bases, expecting to hold territory through brute force. Humans didn't attack them head-on. Instead, they cut off supply lines, poisoned food stores, and spread disinformation, making the Zorvath paranoid, causing them to turn on each other. The High Command couldn't believe the reports. Humans shouldn't have been this dangerous. How could a species that had never fought interstellar wars suddenly become the greatest threat the Empire had ever faced? Then came the unthinkable. The first full-scale assault. On the industrial world of Chrysal 7, a key supplier of Zorvath warships, the Empire believed its defenses were impenetrable. Dozens of automated turrets, legions of elite soldiers, and an energy shield strong enough to withstand a nuclear strike protected the planet. It should have been impossible to breach, until the humans arrived. First, a series of cyberattacks shut down the planet's communication network. Conflicting orders spread across Zorvath ranks, causing chaos among their defenses. Then, a hacked orbital cannon, previously under Zorvath control, turned its guns on the shield generator, blasting it apart from the inside. Before the defenders could react, human strike teams, clad in scavenged Zorvath armor, breached the main compound. They fought with terrifying efficiency, using stolen weapons and perfected guerrilla tactics. By the time Zorvath reinforcements arrived, the battle was over. The shipyards were in flames. The factories were demolished. The humans had vanished into the stars, taking with them stolen warships and enough firepower to change the war forever. For the first time in Zorvath history, an enslaved species had not only resisted, but launched an invasion of their own. Fear spread through the Empire. Whispers filled the ranks of the Zorvath military. Commanders spoke in hushed voices. Even the High Command felt it, a cold, unfamiliar terror creeping into their bones. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were winning. And the Zorvath had no idea how to stop them. The Zorvath Empire prided itself on dominance. They ruled through fear, the crushing, suffocating certainty that resisting them was suicide. But now, that fear was gone. Humanity had defied them, escaped enslavement, fought back. And worse, they had won battles. Zorvath commanders tried to downplay the situation. The High Command declared the uprising contained. Broadcasts assured the Empire's citizens that the humans were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. But behind closed doors, the truth was clear. The humans were everywhere. Outposts on the fringes of Zorvath space had gone silent. Supply convoys were disappearing without a trace. Military bases found their own security systems turned against them. And then came the worst news of all. An entire Zorvath fleet, 20 warships strong, was dispatched to hunt down the resistance. It was a show of force, a demonstration that no species could stand against the Empire. They expected an easy victory. Instead, they vanished. No distress signals, no escape pods, nothing. The only clue was a message, broadcast across Zorvath military channels. You are the prey now. Panic spread like wildfire. Governors abandoned their posts. Officers resigned rather than face what they now called the human plague. But fear wasn't the only thing collapsing. Across the Empire, something even worse was happening. Hope. For the first time in history, other enslaved species saw the impossible, a species that had defied the Zorvath and lived, a species that had struck back. And if humans could do it, so could they. Rebellions erupted across Zorvath-controlled worlds. Slave laborers rose up, guards were overrun, and entire planets began breaking free. The Empire, stretched thin from its war against humanity, suddenly found itself surrounded by enemies. The High Command finally realized the truth. They had lost control. Desperate, they enacted their final, most brutal plan. Extermination. If they couldn't break humanity, they would wipe them out. The order was given. Deploy the Annihilation Fleet. Thousands of warships carrying enough firepower to erase Earth from existence. The Zorvath believed they had finally won. But once again, they had underestimated humanity. Because the fleet never made it to Earth. As it traveled through hyperspace, a message played across every ship's command screen. We knew you would come. Then, the ships began failing. Engines cut out. Navigation systems turned to chaos. Weapons refused to fire. The fleet had been hacked. And when the Zorvath ships finally dropped out of hyperspace, they weren't near Earth. They were in the heart of a deadly, uncharted nebula, one from which no ship had ever returned. As the first warships vanished into the storm, one final transmission echoed through the void. This is our galaxy now. And then the fleet was gone. The Zorvath had never known fear, not real fear, not the kind that seeped into their bones and whispered of inevitable doom. But now, fear was all they knew. The fleet they had sent to annihilate Earth was gone, vanished into the uncharted nebula, its fate unknown. Every attempt to communicate with the ships returned only silence. And then, the whispers started. Rumors spread like wildfire. Entire colonies had fallen without a fight. Zorvath governors had been found dead in their chambers, their own security codes used against them. Warships had been hijacked mid-flight, their crews either captured or slaughtered. And worst of all, it wasn't just humans anymore. The Empire's enslaved species, races that had once cowered under Zorvath rule, were rising. On the industrial world of Zarek Prime, the enslaved Vorish tore apart their chains and stormed the armories, using Zorvath weapons to massacre their captors. On the frigid wastelands of Glacium 7, the insectoid Kirik, once docile workers, ambushed an entire Zorvath garrison and took the planet for themselves. One by one, the Empire's conquered worlds turned against them. The High Command was in chaos. Their fleets were stretched thin, their armies overwhelmed. The human plague had spread beyond their control. Desperation led to madness. Some Zorvath leaders called for surrender, an unthinkable act. They were immediately executed. Others demanded Earth be wiped from existence, even if it meant sacrificing entire fleets to do it. But it was too late. Humanity had done more than fight back. They had learned. And now, the war was no longer about survival. It was about vengeance. The first human-led counter-invasion began on the fortress world of Sci-Fi 9, a once impenetrable stronghold. Using stolen warships, human pilots infiltrated the planet's defense grid, disabling it before the Zorvath even realized they were under attack. Then, from the darkness of space, human strike teams descended. They fought with brutal precision, using Zorvath tactics against them. Flanking maneuvers, electronic warfare, and shock assaults so devastating that entire battalions surrendered without a fight. Within hours, the Zorvath command center was in flames. The last transmission from Sci-Fi 9 was a desperate, crackling message from the Zorvath governor. We cannot stop them. They know us. They fight like us, but better. We were fools to think we could break them. Then, silence. The planet was lost. For the first time in history, the Zorvath were the ones being conquered. And this was only the beginning. Because Earth was no longer just fighting for freedom. Humanity was coming for the Empire itself. The Zorveth had ruled for centuries, their grip on the galaxy absolute. No species had ever challenged them and survived. But now, the unthinkable had happened. The war had turned. The humans weren't just fighting for freedom anymore. They were taking worlds. One by one, Zorveth colonies fell. Fortress planets, once thought untouchable, were overrun. Entire fleets, sent to crush the rebellion, were either destroyed or captured. The humans had learned the art of war and perfected it. Zorveth soldiers, once feared across the stars, now refused to fight. Deserters fled in droves. Officers abandoned their posts, fearing assassination. Some Zorveth even surrendered willingly, begging for mercy that they had never shown to others. And then, the unthinkable happened. Earth's fleet reached the Zorveth homeworld. The High Command, once untouchable, watched in horror as human warships emerged from hyperspace, stolen, modified, and more advanced than ever. But it wasn't just humans who had come for vengeance. The enslaved species of the Empire had rallied to humanity's cause. Kyrric warbands, once laborers, now elite assassins, struck from the shadows, eliminating Zorveth leaders before they could flee. Vorish warriors, who had spent generations in chains, stormed the streets of the Zorveth capital, tearing down the banners of their oppressors. And above them, human bombers rained fire from the sky. The Zorveth tried to fight back. Their fleets scrambled, their soldiers rallied, but it was useless, because humanity had done what no other species had ever done before. They had broken the Zorveth. One by one, the defenses of the homeworld collapsed. The once great palaces of the Empire burned, their golden spires crumbling into dust. And at the heart of it all, in the war-torn ruins of the Imperial Palace, the last of the Zorveth High Command gathered for a final transmission. Their leader, Supreme Warlord Krezin, once the most feared being in the galaxy, stood before the camera. His once pristine armor was battered, dented, and covered in the blood of his own kind. He took a deep breath, then spoke. "To the warriors of Earth, we surrender." The war was over, but humanity's vengeance was not. Because as the transmission played across the galaxy, one final human message followed. Surrender is accepted, but mercy must be earned. And the Zorveth knew. Their punishment had only just begun. The Zorveth had ruled through fear, but in the end, it was they who had been afraid. Their empire, once a monument to dominance, was now a graveyard of fire and ruin. Their fleets lay in wreckage, their armies had surrendered, and their homeworld was under human control. The war was over, but humanity did not celebrate, because the Zorveth had not simply been conquerors, they had been monsters. They had enslaved entire species, butchered billions, and ruled through terror. If their kind were allowed to rise again, the galaxy would never be safe. So the humans gave them a choice: justice or extinction. The terms were simple. Every surviving member of the Zorveth ruling class, warlords, generals, governors, would stand trial. Every crime, every atrocity would be answered for. There would be no mercy for those who had built their empire on the suffering of others. But for the civilians, the workers, and the next generation of Zorveth, humanity gave something unexpected. A chance. Not freedom, not yet, but a path forward. For every Zorveth world that had once thrived on the backs of slaves, the new human-led alliance flipped the balance. The Zorveth would rebuild, but not as rulers, as servants. They would work under the very species they had once enslaved. They would toil to undo the damage they had done, restoring the planets they had ravaged, repairing the lives they had shattered. Some Zorveth resisted, still clinging to their old pride. But humanity had no patience for defiance. The moment rebellion sparked, it was crushed without hesitation. Over time, the Zorveth learned. They learned what it meant to live under another's rule. They learned the weight of their crimes. And slowly, They changed. Generations later, the Zorveth were no longer feared, no longer conquerors. They had been humbled, reshaped into something new, something better. The galaxy, once a place of oppression and war, had become something greater. Not because of peace, but because humanity had ensured that no empire would ever rise again. And for the first time in history, the galaxy belonged to all. Not through conquest, but through justice.